Hi! Today we're going to be working on this simple decoupage and stamping project. I found this decoupage paper online and I thought these little birds were just adorable. I'm just using a small paintbrush and some water to cut around the top of these birds. I don't want all this excess decoupage paper on the top. I want to do some paint finish and my stamping above these birds, so I'm just going to get rid of this excess paper. You could also just fussy cut the birds out using scissors. I didn't think of it at the time, but after, I wish I would have done it that way. But this is kind of habit for me. I always cut out using water, so I wasn't thinking it through. I'm just kind of lining this up now to where I want it to sit, and having it hang over the edges is fine. We'll take care of that later. I'm using DIY Paint's clear patina as a decoupage medium. You want to make sure you get a good even coat that's thick enough that it will actually wet the paper and adhere to the paper. Otherwise you get air bubbles and you don't want any of that. Then I apply the paper and smoothing it out to try to get rid of as many wrinkles as possible. Then just grab up a bald piece of saran wrap and help smooth that out. That stops any additional friction from just using your fingertips, and it really helps you get it nice and smooth without tearing your paper. Make sure you get in under those edges. You don't want the paper to lift up anywhere. And then I go right ahead and I apply another coat of the clear patina on top of the paper. When I have a project like this that I only have decoupage paper on part of it, I always go over with the decoupage medium over the whole piece just to make the texture or the finish the same overall. It just kind of helps with the cohesiveness of the project. On this piece I want some texture, so you can see I'm just kind of brushing in all directions. Still getting a nice even coat, but I want the texture. I'm just taking a baby wipe here and wiping around the edges in case there's any buildup or drips. Now just a quick buzz with the heat tool to dry it, and I'm ready to sand off all these edges. I just use a sanding block and run the block down away from the paper. That way it just trims it off nice and cleanly on the edge of the project. Works perfectly. So now I want to add a little bit of color to the top as a base for my stamping. This is DIY Paint in Prom Queen. I also use Petticoat Pink, a little bit of Summer Crush, some Sea Glass, just kind of random colors, but not really. I was kind of pulling them out of the birds themselves. I pretty much only end up using the Prom Queen, but it's always better to have some paint colors out. Right there, I just added a little bit of distilled water into my paint because it's pretty thick and a little bit too thick. So just a little bit of water, and always use distilled water directly into your paint jar. Tap water, bottled water, they all can have little bacteria in them that can affect your paint. So always use distilled water when adding directly to your paint jar. So now I'm just gonna add little bits of paint, and I'm just kind of stippling it on. This is a technique that I use quite a bit. I use it for antiquing. I use it anywhere that I want to just add bits of color or texture or anything. I apply it with the brush, and then I grab a baby wipe and I ball it up and I kind of pat it off. Always changing the baby wipe, different pressures depending how much. Sometimes I add a little bit more water. DIY paint, you can reactivate with water until you seal it. So even when it's dry, just mist it with some water and you can get a little bit more movement out of it. So it's still looking a little bold to me, and I want to soften it. So I've added some water with my mister bottle, and I'm going back over it again with my baby wipe and pulling even more paint off. This time I'm going to mist it with water first before I go in with some other color. That's another way of making it so that your project isn't so thirsty, I'm going to call it. It'll help your paint move a lot better. It's just a different way of adding color, adding texture, adding some visual interest. And I'm just dabbing it on, and then I'm just going to go with my baby wipe and dab it off until it looks how I want it to look. Don't forget, with DIY paint, it changes a lot when it's dry. But that boldness in the color comes back when you seal it. Let's give this another little buzz with the heat tool to dry it off, and we're ready for stamping. So I've decided to go with the Sprigs stamp from IOD. This stamp has just these beautiful little sprigs that are fine and detailed, and they're just the perfect little addition. I'm putting them up here upside down. It's just something a little bit different, and it kind of looks like the little birds are looking up at these little sprigs. I'm just trying to figure out my placement here. Don't forget, when you're doing this, when you're placing your stamps like this, always place them bottom side up. That way you can just come on in with your thin mount and pick them all up, and they're already all lined up and ready for you to use. Okay, so my placement's all figured out, and I'm coming in with my thin mount. I'm just lining it up on the bottom, and that way I have an easy reference point for when I'm going to reapply the stamp. And that just picked them all up, and now they're ready to apply the ink. For this project, I'm using IOD's ink in Stone Gray. It's like a soft charcoal color. And just dab the ink onto your stamps, up and down. Don't do any side to side movement. You just want to dab it on there, and don't press too hard, because then you just smush the ink in all the places you don't want it. I'm just cleaning up around the stamp a little bit with a baby wipe, just in case. I don't want any of that extra to get on my project. And then we're ready to stamp. So I'm just doing a little pre-stamp just to get rid of any excess, and then it's ready to go on the piece. I just line up the bottom, which was my reference from my setup, and always support or stabilize your piece with one hand. And you can use a brayer like I am here, or you can just use your other hand and gently, with gentle pressure, press down on your stamps to get the ink on there. I kind of do both in here. You don't want to press too hard, because it just smooshes the stamp, and then you don't get a nice clear stamp impression. And there we go. That worked out perfect. So now I always take a baby wipe and I clean my stamps right away. I do this for quite a while, quite a few times before I actually will scrub all my stamps with, I just use a mild dish soap and water, warm water, and scrub them all perfectly clean once in a while. This is just a piece of newsprint that I am blotting any excess ink off the project. Be careful you don't move around that sheet. Now I just flip it over. You can see what I've blotted off there. Flip it over and do it again, and that just helps any smudge avoidance. So this step you would not have to do if you would have just fussy cut around the top of the birds with scissors. So the shade of the decoupage paper itself is a little bit different than the paint that I had used on the background. So now I'm just going in with that paint color and I'm blending in that decoupage paper into the background. You wouldn't have to do this if you would have cut it out with scissors, so that's why I mentioned at the beginning that you I should have done it that way. Here's a little closer view of what I mean. Once this paint dries, it blends in really well, and then when I put the top coat over the whole piece, you can't even really tell at all. But this would have been a lot easier if I would have just cut them out with scissors. So, live and learn. Another quick buzz with the heat tool. So now I've decided to go in and add some color, just faint color, to the flowers. So I add a little bit of pink and a little kind of a peachy tone. I'm just blending colors from the ones that I mentioned earlier. I'm just blending them and creating colors that will kind of tie in with the birds. So now I'm adding the clear patina as an overall sealer for the whole piece. I've misted a little bit of water in there and I'm going to mix it up just to make it a little bit thinner. The clear patina is a little bit on the thick side, and I wanted it a little bit runnier so it brushes on a lot easier. And I'm just going over the whole piece. Just being careful not to smear the fresh paint. Even though it's dry, it's DIY paint and it can reactivate with the moisture in your top coat. So just don't play with it too much, just brush it on and leave her be. And that's it. Another quick dry with the heat tool and it's done. So it's a quick little project. I think all in all it took me about 45 minutes to do this whole piece, including dry time. And it looks super cute. Thanks so much for watching this tutorial, and I hope it inspires you to try a project of your own. If you have any questions, just pop it in the comments.